What happens when a man capable of ending your life with a single phone call stands in the darkness of a stairwell and watches his 72-year-old mother tumble down the steps like a rag doll? What happens when that man reaches for his gun, feels the cold steel under his fingertips, and then, slowly, impossibly, pulls his hand back? Saturday, the 14th of October, 1949, approximately 11:21 in the morning. Building 319, West 139th Street, Harlem, New York. The hallway smelled of boiled cabbage, wet plaster, and decades of neglect. That particular smell that clung to every tenement Harlem building like a second skin. The smell of a landlord who collected rent on the first of every month and spent nothing in return. The light bulb on the second-floor landing had burned out 8 months ago and had never been replaced, because replacing light bulbs cost money, and Sal Greenbaum did not spend money on buildings that housed people he did not consider fully human. Ellsworth Raymond Johnson, known to every soul in Harlem simply as Bumpy, was climbing the stairs carrying a brown paper bag from the grocery on Lenox Avenue. Milk, bread, butter. A Saturday visit to his mother, Margaret Johnson, who lived on the third floor and had lived on the third floor for 31 consecutive years, paying her rent every single month without fail, through the Depression, through the war, through every hardship that Harlem had thrown at a black woman raising 8 children alone. Bumpy was dressed in a charcoal gray suit, tailored on Savile Row during a trip to London that most people in Harlem only whispered about, a white shirt with French cuffs, and shoes polished to a mirror shine that reflected the dim stairwell light in tiny flashes as he climbed. He moved slowly, not because he was tired, because Bumpy Johnson never rushed anywhere. Not because rushing was for people who were afraid of being late, and Bumpy Johnson had not been afraid of anything since 1925. He heard the voices before he saw them. His mother's voice, thin, trembling, the voice of a woman who had learned decades ago that arguing with white men rarely ended well for black women. And another voice, male, high-pitched, the unmistakable cadence of Brooklyn Yiddish vowels stretched over English consonants. The voice was screaming about overdue rent. Bumpy reached the turn between the second and third floors and stopped. The darkness of the burned-out landing concealed him completely. A shadow in a $3,000 suit, invisible watching. What he saw made every muscle in his body lock simultaneously. Sal Greenbaum, short, balding, wearing a brown suit with a mustard stain on the left lapel, stood on the third-floor landing with his index finger jabbing into the chest of Margaret Johnson. She stood in her doorway in a house dress and a flour-dusted apron. She had been baking bread, the way she baked bread every Saturday morning for as long as Bumpy could remember, the smell of it drifting down the stairwell like a ghost of normalcy in a building that had none. Margaret was holding the door frame with her left hand, and her right hand was raised in front of her, palm out, a gesture of surrender that Bumpy had never seen his mother make to anyone in his entire life. Then Greenbaum grabbed her forearm, twisted, turned her toward the stairs, and pushed. Margaret Johnson flew down the steps. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 steps. Her body hit the second-floor landing with a sound that Bumpy would hear in his sleep for the rest of his life, the dull, wet thud of a human being striking old wood and crumbling plaster, the crack of a shoulder against a wall, the small, involuntary cry that escaped her lips, somewhere between a gasp and a prayer. Plaster dust settled on her gray hair like snow. Her house dress was torn at the hem. Blood began to seep from a gash above her right eyebrow, slow at first, then faster, running down her temple and into her hair. The paper bag slipped from Bumpy's hands. The milk bottle inside shattered against the banister, and white liquid poured down the steps, flowing toward his mother's body on the landing below, mixing with the blood from her forehead. Milk and blood on dark wood, white and red merging into pink, pooling around the flour-dusted apron of a 72-year-old woman who had never missed a rent payment in 31 years. 7 days, old woman, 7 days, and I throw you and all your junk onto the sidewalk, and you should thank me for not calling the police. This is my building, my stairs, and I decide who walks on them. He could not see Bumpy in the darkness of the burned-out landing. That burned-out light bulb, the one Greenbaum had refused to replace for 8 months to save 40 cents, was saving his life in this exact moment, because Bumpy's right hand had already moved behind the flap of his suit jacket. His fingers closed around the grip of a Colt .32 caliber revolver that sat in a leather holster against his ribs. The steel was warm from his body heat. One squeeze, 1 second, one bullet through the chest of the man standing 12 feet above him. Problem solved, permanently. But Margaret lifted her head from the landing floor. Through the blood running into her right eye, she saw her son. She saw his hand behind his jacket, and she knew. She had known what that hand meant since Bumpy was 14 years old. She shook her head. Once, almost imperceptible. A movement so small that no one else in the world would have noticed it. But Bumpy noticed. Because he had been watching his mother's face his entire life, and her face was the only authority he had never questioned. He pulled his hand back, slowly, millimeter by millimeter. Those 2 seconds cost him more than anything he had ever done, more than any deal, any war, any decision in 25 years of running Harlem. Because in those 2 seconds, Bumpy Johnson chose between fast revenge and slow destruction, and Sal Greenbaum, whistling something cheerful as he walked back down the corridor on the 3rd floor, had no idea that the darkness of that stairwell had just saved him from a bullet, but would not save him from what was coming. But before we go any further, remember one thing. In this story, there is a moment that almost nobody knows about. A moment in the kitchen on the 3rd floor of Building 319 on West 139th Street when Bumpy Johnson spoke a sentence, quietly, looking not at the person in front of him, but at the stairs through the open door. 7 words, just 7 words that explain everything. Why he did what he did, why he did it exactly the way he did it, and why this story became the legend that all of Harlem still tells to this day. Those 7 words are the most important part of everything you will hear today, but we will get to them at the very end, because to truly understand them, you first need to walk the entire path, from the milk and blood on the stairs to a white door in Great Neck and back again. And for now, Bumpy was silent. He knelt beside his mother, lifted her, carried her up the 7 steps she had just fallen down, cradling her against his chest, feeling the wetness of blood soaking through his $3,000 suit, and not caring about anything except the weight of her in his arms and the small sounds of pain she made with each step. He carried her into the apartment, set her in the chair by the window, closed the door, and began cleaning the gash above her eyebrow with a damp cloth, gently, methodically, the way he did everything, with absolute precision and absolute control. Margaret cried, not from the pain, from the shame of her son seeing her on the floor, the shame of being pushed downstairs in her own building by a man who had taken her money every month for 31 years, the shame that Harlem piled on its people every day in 1,000 small ways, and occasionally in ways that were not small at all. Bumpy said nothing. 20 minutes of complete silence. The only sounds in the apartment were Margaret's quiet sobs and the ticking of a clock on the kitchen wall. Then he kissed her forehead, gently on the side without the wound, walked out of the apartment and stood on the landing. He looked down at the stairs. The milk was still there. The blood was still there. Drying now, turning from bright red to rust, from white to yellowish. He smiled. The kind of smile that anyone who truly knew Bumpy Johnson recognized immediately. It meant someone was about to pay in a way that all of Harlem would talk about for the next 30 years. The smell of fresh bread drifted from behind the closed apartment door, the bread Margaret had been baking when Greenbaum came for the rent, the bread she baked every Saturday for her son, the bread that would still be warm on the counter when Bumpy returned hours later with a plan so precise, so multi-layered, and so devastating that Sal Greenbaum, a man protected by a prosecutor, a police captain, and a city alderman, would be on his knees within 72 hours, screaming words that would echo through the oral history of Harlem for generations. If you want to find out how this incredible story ends, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you never miss our next videos. But let us return to that landing, to Bumpy Johnson, standing over dried milk and blood, smiling. Johnson, because to understand what he was about to do, you need to understand who he was, and who Bumpy Johnson was. That requires going back 24 years to a dusty street in Charleston, South Carolina, where an 18-year-old boy stood over a white man's broken body and learned the lesson that would define everything that came after. Bumpy Johnson was a man who weighed every word like a jeweler weighs stones. In 25 years in Harlem, those who were closest, Jesse Bolden, Gilbert Allen, the men of the inner circle, could count on the fingers of one hand the moments when Bumpy said something that changed people's faces. Not threats. He never made threats. Something else. Something after which the person across from him understood that the world had just shifted. One of those moments, connected to a staircase, to a mother, and to steps where milk and blood had dried, was still ahead. Bumpy Johnson never rushed, never acted in fury. He planned. And when his plans worked, people did not merely lose, they ceased to exist as a force. 1925, Charleston, South Carolina. 18-year-old Ellsworth Johnson stood over a white man who lay in the red clay dirt of a market street with his jaw broken in 2 places, his nose flattened, and 3 teeth scattered around his head like spilled dice. The man had called Margaret Johnson a word that no son should ever hear directed at his mother. Young Ellsworth had responded with his fists, fast, savage, unthinking. 20 witnesses. A black boy beating a white man unconscious in broad daylight on a southern street in 1925. That was not an arrest. That was a rope and a tree. His family smuggled him north on a train that same night, $5 in his pocket, a change of clothes in a paper bag, and a vow made to himself in the rattling darkness of a freight car somewhere between Virginia and Maryland, that he would never react with impulse again, that he would learn to strike in ways that left no bruises but destroyed everything, that the next time someone touched his mother or anyone he loved, the response would not be a broken jaw. It would be a broken life. By 1949, 24 years later, that vow had built an empire. Bumpy Johnson controlled Harlem the way a conductor controls an orchestra, not by playing every instrument, but by knowing exactly when each one should sound and how loudly. gambling operations spanning more than 200 locations, numbers, rackets, dice games, card rooms, monthly revenue exceeding $150,000. 14 police officers on the payroll, receiving envelopes on the 1st and 15th of every month with the regularity of a government pension. 3 judges who answered his calls before they answered anyone else's. 2 city council members who understood that their continued careers depended on Bumpy's goodwill. His alliances stretched beyond Harlem. Lucky Luciano, the most powerful mafia boss in American history, considered Bumpy a personal friend and a business equal, a distinction he granted to almost no one outside the Italian families. Frank Costello consulted Bumpy on matters affecting Upper Manhattan. Vito Genovese sent Christmas cards to the Johnson household every year, signed personally with a respect that bordered on deference. In 1943, Vito Genovese asked his consigliere about Bumpy Johnson. The consigliere's response became one of the most repeated lines in the underworld of New York. Don Vito, there are only 2 laws in Harlem, the law of the state of New York and the law of Bumpy Johnson. And trust me, the second one is enforced far more reliably than the first. 3 times in 24 years, someone had challenged Bumpy directly. 3 times the challenger had ceased to be a problem. In 1931, a drug dealer tried to operate without Bumpy's permission. In 1931, he vanished within 11 days. No body found, no witnesses, no trace. In 1937, a police captain arrested one of Bumpy's men without cause. Within 3 weeks, that captain was transferred to Staten Island, the Siberia of the New York Police Department, where he spent the remaining 9 years of his career directing traffic at intersections that saw fewer than 40 cars per day. In 1944, an Italian bootlegger tried to cheat Bumpy out of $30,000. Within 1 month, the bootlegger returned the full amount, plus 10%, for the inconvenience, and delivered a public apology in a restaurant with 12 witnesses present. Bumpy's hands rested on the kitchen table, massive hands with knuckles scarred white from the street fights of the 20s, with an immaculate manicure that he maintained every Wednesday without exception, and with a gold signet ring on the left pinky, a gift from Lucky Luciano himself, given in 1938 as a symbol of an alliance that both men honored until their deaths. These hands had held guns, signed contracts, counted millions and broken bones, and right now they held nothing. They lay flat on the old wood of Margaret Johnson's kitchen table while she groaned in her sleep in the next room. That same day, noon, coffee growing cold in a chipped cup, the smell of bread and blood and plaster, and Bumpy staring at his hands, doing what he always did before his most devastating moves, thinking. Not about Greenbaum the man, about Greenbaum the system. And anyone who knew Bumpy, truly knew him, understood that this silence was not surrender. This was the silence of a man already counting the stairs in the opposite direction. What that meant would become clear within 36 hours. For Greenbaum, within 72. By then, it would be far too late. 6 days and 20 hours remained until Greenbaum's ultimatum to Margaret. But Bumpy had already decided. Greenbaum would not survive his own deadline. Not physically, he would live. But everything that made him, Sal Greenbaum, master of 27 buildings and 1,200 families, would be destroyed long before Saturday. Sunday, the 15th of October, 6 o'clock in the morning. Bumpy stepped out of his mother's building and did something he had not done once in 24 years of living in Harlem. He walked the entire neighborhood on foot, not as a king surveying his domain, as a surgeon examining a tumor. 5 hours, 27 buildings, every single one bearing the same brass plate on its front door. property of Greenbaum Realty Corp., every single one crumbling, overcrowded, reeking. Bumpy descended into the basement of the building on 136th Street with a flashlight, and what he saw made him take an involuntary step backward. Bumpy Johnson, a man who had seen and smelled things that would make ordinary people lose consciousness, stepped back from the stench. Rat nests the size of basketballs clustered in every corner. Pipes wrapped in rags instead of insulation. Black mold climbing from floor to ceiling in sheets so thick they looked like fur. And on every door in the building, a notice in Greenbaum's handwriting, "Rent due on the 1st. No exceptions, no excuses." The numbers told the real story. Greenbaum charged rents 40 to 60% above market rate. Why? Because black families in New York in 1949 had almost nowhere else to go. Racial covenants and housing discrimination had corralled them into Harlem like cattle into a pen, and landlords like Greenbaum could charge whatever they wanted because the alternative was the street. 3 children from Greenbaum's buildings had been hospitalized in the past year alone. 1 from a rat bite that became infected, 2 from lead paint poisoning caused by chips falling from walls that had not been repainted since the Hoover administration, and Greenbaum himself. Greenbaum lived in Great Neck, Long Island. A white 2-story house with a manicured lawn, a swimming pool covered for winter, and 2 automobiles in the driveway, a Buick and a Cadillac. His wife Esther shopped on Fifth Avenue. His sons, David, 14, and Samuel, 11, attended a private school whose annual tuition equaled the rent paid by 6 Harlem families combined. An empire of misery funding a life of suburban comfort. 1,200 families freezing in winter so that 2 boys could play baseball on a green lawn in summer. Gilbert Allen, the barber whose shop occupied the ground floor of one of Greenbaum's buildings on 139th, told Bumpy the story that crystallized everything. Bumpy, in the winter of 47, the heating broke and stayed broken for 3 weeks. 3 weeks. Mrs. Cooper on the 4th floor boiled water on her stove and placed pots around her baby's crib to keep the child from freezing. We called Greenbaum. His secretary said Mr. Greenbaum was on vacation in Florida. In Florida, Bumpy, while our children were shivering. Bumpy stood in the basement with the flashlight. The beam caught a rat, enormous, the size of a cat, sitting on a pipe. It did not run. It stared at him with black eyes, unafraid. 2 predators assessing each other in the dark. Bumpy almost laughed. "You are not the biggest parasite in this building, sweetheart. The biggest one lives in Great Neck." Then came the critical intelligence. Why Greenbaum felt untouchable. 3 layers of protection stacked like armor. Layer 1. His cousin Morris Greenbaum, Assistant District Attorney for Manhattan, a man who could make any criminal complaint against Sal disappear before it reached a judge. Layer 2, his neighbor in Great Neck, Captain Patrick O'Brien of the 44th Precinct, the precinct responsible for policing Harlem, a man who golfed with Sal every other Sunday and whose mortgage had been mysteriously refinanced at a rate 3 points below market. Layer 3, Alderman Patrick O'Donoghue, who controlled the Housing Inspection Office for Northern Manhattan and who received $500 monthly from Greenbaum's personal account. Every complaint from tenants passed through O'Donoghue's desk and evaporated like rain on hot asphalt. 3 shields. Any attack from one direction would be deflected by the others. A system designed to be impenetrable. Do you remember those 7 words I mentioned at the beginning? Right at this moment, as Bumpy stood in that basement, staring at a rat the size of a cat, breathing the stench of mold, understanding exactly how 3 layers of protection made Greenbaum feel invincible. Right then, those words began forming in his mind. He had not spoken them yet, but they already existed. Now let us return to what Bumpy discovered next, because what he found out about Greenbaum's family would prove more important than any basement. And this was what made Bumpy smile, because systems, as he knew better than almost anyone alive, were vulnerable precisely where they felt most secure. Greenbaum believed his three protectors made him invincible. What Greenbaum did not understand, what no one in his comfortable suburban world had ever taught him, was that protection only works when the protectors are willing to protect, and willingness depends on cost. When the cost of protecting Sal Greenbaum exceeded the benefit of protecting Sal Greenbaum, those three shields would lower themselves faster than he could dial a phone number. By Sunday evening, Bumpy knew more about Greenbaum than Greenbaum knew about himself. Assets, connections, protections, weaknesses, family, the Great Neck address, the boys' school, Esther's shopping route, the Sunday golf with Captain O'Brien. Not because he intended to harm the innocent, that was Bumpy's iron rule, the rule that separated him from common criminals, the line he never crossed and never would: number. He knew about Greenbaum's family for a different reason, a reason that Greenbaum would understand only on the night when he knelt on the floor of his own foyer and screamed words that would enter the oral history of Harlem forever. 5 days and 16 hours until Greenbaum's deadline. 3 layers of protection, 5 directions of attack that Bumpy could already see as clearly as the flashlight beam cutting through basement darkness. 2 timers ticking toward each other, but what no one, not even Bumpy's closest people, could have predicted was the method he would choose. Not the violence they expected, not the negotiation the system was designed to absorb. Something else entirely. Something that would dismantle a man piece by piece in 48 hours, without a single punch thrown, without a single law broken, without a single drop of blood spilled, except the blood already drying on the staircase of Building 319. Sunday, the 15th of October, 11 o'clock at night, Lenox Avenue. October wind pushing newspaper pages along the sidewalk like tumbleweeds. Neon bar signs painting the wet asphalt in red and blue. Jazz drifting up from a basement club on the corner of 136th. A muted trumpet, the brush of a snare, the kind of sound that was Harlem's heartbeat. The music that played underneath everything, underneath the poverty and the rats and the landlords who never fixed anything. Bumpy walked slowly, hands clasped behind his back, like a professor on an evening stroll. His bodyguard, Jesse Bolden, followed 20 paces behind, close enough to protect, far enough not to interrupt thinking. Margaret Johnson at this very minute lay in the darkness of her apartment, unable to sleep. Her shoulder throbbed with pain at every movement, and behind her closed eyes the stairs rushed toward her face again and again, an endless loop of falling. She did not know that 12 blocks from her bed, her son stood beneath a street lamp on Lenox Avenue, carrying 7 words inside him, hard as granite, waiting only for the moment to speak them aloud and set everything in motion. Bumpy stopped across from the Abyssinian Baptist Church on 138th Street. Across the road, one of Greenbaum's buildings. 4th floor, a window boarded with plywood. 3rd floor, a light, the silhouette of a woman rocking a baby. 2nd floor, dark, but the sound of crying carried through the cracked glass. 1st floor, Gilbert's barber shop, closed for the night, the striped pole unlit. And Bumpy saw the structure. Not a problem, a structure. Greenbaum was not one landlord. Greenbaum was a system. 27 buildings, 1,200 families, millions of dollars, 3 layers of protection. Striking Greenbaum was striking one man. Striking the system, that was changing Harlem. He turned to Jesse. When you want to fell a tree, you do not chop the branches, you poison the roots. Greenbaum thinks his roots are his friends in City Hall. He is wrong. His roots are money, his rent checks. We are not going to hit him, Jesse. We are going to cut off his cash flow and watch him wither. In 3 days, Jesse. 3 days? Bumpy, he has a cousin in the DA's office, a police captain next door, an alderman in his pocket. Bumpy. That is exactly why 3 days, because in 3 days, not one of them will pick up the phone when Greenbaum calls. 5 directions of simultaneous attack. 1. A rent strike across all 27 buildings at once, total cessation of payments, organized building by building, floor by floor, family by family. 2. Mass complaints to the City Housing Inspection Office, bypassing Alderman O'Donoghue entirely, going straight to the Deputy City Commissioner. 3. A series of articles in the Amsterdam News and the Pittsburgh Courier with photographs of rats, mold, lead paint, and hospitalized children. 4. A blockade of contractors and suppliers. Every plumber, electrician, and repairman in Harlem would receive a simple message. Anyone who accepts a job from Greenbaum Realty loses every other contract in the neighborhood permanently. 5. Pressure on the bank holding Greenbaum's mortgages through a depositor whose account was large enough to make the bank manager very, very nervous. 5 strikes, simultaneously, beginning at dawn on Tuesday. The shadow of Bumpy on the wet sidewalk stretched long under the street lamp, like the hand of a clock pointing directly at Greenbaum's building across the street. 48 hours. That was the time Bumpy gave himself. Not 7 days. Greenbaum's number, 48 hours, because he wanted Greenbaum to come to him before the deadline. Not in 7 days. Sooner. On his knees, midnight, Bumpy at home. The black notebook, no label on its cover, but everyone who knew of its existence also knew that it contained the names and phone numbers of people who could accomplish virtually anything in New York City. Bumpy placed the notebook next to the telephone, poured a bourbon, went to bed, fell asleep instantly. People with a plan always sleep soundly. At 5:30 on Monday morning, he would wake up and make 12 phone calls in 40 minutes that would set a machine in motion, a machine that Greenbaum could not stop even if he mobilized every friend in City Hall, every badge in the police department, and every ounce of prosecutorial power his cousin could muster. 12 calls, 40 minutes, and then it begins. And right now, in this exact second, as Bumpy placed the notebook beside the telephone, those 7 words crossed from thought into decision. He had not spoken them yet. That would happen in 36 hours in the hallway of his own apartment before stepping into a black Cadillac bound for Great Neck. And when it happened, Jesse Bolden, the man who had walked as Bumpy's shadow for 12 years, who had seen everything, survived everything, and believed that nothing could surprise him anymore, would lower his eyes and take 1 step backward. Not from fear, from understanding. What exactly did Bumpy say? Soon. But first, the notebook beside the telephone. 12 names, 40 minutes, the machine. Monday, the 16th of October, 9 o'clock in the evening. The back room of Martin's Pool Hall, corner of Lenox Avenue and 135th Street. Green baize on the tables, cigar smoke pooling under low-hanging lamps, the click of billiard balls through the wall, the soundtrack of 100,000 Harlem evenings condensed into one room. Bumpy sat at the head of a poker table. In front of him, a notepad, a pen, and a glass of water. Not a drop of alcohol. When Bumpy worked, he did not drink. 16 people filed in, each one a weapon. Attorney Randolph Carr, one of 7 black lawyers practicing in Manhattan, thin, wire-rimmed glasses, a briefcase stuffed with copies of the New York City Housing Code, and 17 years of precedent cases that no one had ever bothered to file. Pastor James Delaney of the Abyssinian Baptist Church, massive, barrel-chested, a bass voice that could rattle stained glass, a white clerical collar, and the moral authority of 3,000 parishioners who would do whatever he asked because he had earned that trust over 20 years. Alvin Mouse Carson, Bumpy's informant inside the police department, small, twitchy, eyes that never stopped moving, but worth his weight in gold because he could tell you what every precinct captain was thinking before the captain knew himself. Gertrude Wilson, reporter for the Amsterdam News, the only woman in the room, close-cropped hair, notebook open, pen moving before anyone spoke. Samuel Porter, plumber who serviced 30 buildings in Harlem and knew every pipe, every valve, every boiler, and every contractor who worked north of 125th Street. Gilbert Allen, the barber who knew every tenant, every grievance, every story whispered over a haircut. Plus 10 of Bumpy's street people, runners, watchers, the eyes and ears of the neighborhood. Bumpy stood. The room went silent. Instantly. Not the kind of silence that follows a request for attention. The kind that follows the rising of a man whose name alone can change the temperature of a room by 10 degrees. Sal Greenbaum pushed my mother down a flight of stairs. She is 72 years old. She weighs 110 pounds. He pushed her down 7 steps because she was 1 week late on rent. 1 week, after 31 years. He paused, looked around the room, slowly, making eye contact with each person, one by one, and each person felt the weight of that gaze like a physical thing, like a hand pressing on their chest. But we are not here because of my mother. The pause stretched. 3 seconds. 5. The cigar smoke hung motionless. We are here because he does this to 1,000 other mothers in this neighborhood, and we are going to stop it. Not next month, not next week. In 48 hours, here is the plan. He unrolled a hand-drawn map of Harlem on the poker table. 27 red circles, Greenbaum's buildings, scattered across 12 blocks, connected by lines to a central square labeled Greenbaum. Next to each building, a number, the count of families inside. And he began assigning roles the way a general assigns sectors before an offensive. Carr, 27 simultaneous complaints filed with the housing inspection, each backed by photographs, medical records, and signed witness statements, bypassing the alderman entirely, delivered by hand to Deputy Commissioner Arthur Baker's desk. Baker owed Bumpy a favor from 46 when Bumpy had helped his nephew out of a bad situation with bookmakers. Baker would make sure these complaints did not disappear. Delaney, an emergency congregation meeting Monday night, followed by a Sunday-style proclamation on Tuesday morning, broadcast to 3,000 parishioners. Not 1 cent to Greenbaum until every building is repaired, every rat is killed, every child is safe. The church network would carry the message to all 27 buildings within hours. Wilson, 3 articles in 3 days. Day 1, photographs of the basements, the rats, the mold, the lead paint. Day 2, the story of Mrs. Cooper's baby and the broken heating. Day 3, the contrast, Greenbaum's Great Neck mansion next to his Harlem tenements, side by side, with dollar figures attached to each. Porter, phone calls to every contractor in Harlem. 17 plumbers, electricians, and repairmen would receive the same message. Anyone who accepts work from Greenbaum Realty will lose every other contract in the neighborhood, Every single one, permanently. Mouse, Carson, real-time intelligence from inside the police department. What the precinct knows, what the DA's office is doing, when Greenbaum calls his protectors and what they say in response. Gilbert, tenant organization. And what they say door to door, building by building. Signatures, testimonies, a united front. Every family on the same page by Tuesday dawn. Street people, surveillance. Every building watched. Greenbaum's movements tracked. His people's movements tracked. Nothing enters or exits without Bumpy knowing. 7 directions, simultaneously. Starting Tuesday morning, the meeting ended at 11:30. 16 people left the back room one by one, 3 minutes apart, so as not to attract attention. Each knew their role. Each knew the timeline. Each understood there was no turning back, and not one of them, not even Bumpy, could have imagined how quickly Greenbaum would crumble. Because what they planned as a 48-hour operation would actually take 26 hours. Greenbaum would break faster than anyone expected, but the way he would break, a way that involved a late-night visit, a scream about children, and kneeling on the tile floor of his own foyer, that no one could have predicted. Tuesday, the 17th of October, 7 o'clock in the morning. Sal Greenbaum woke in his white 2-story house in Great Neck, Long Island, to the sound of birds and the smell of Esther's coffee drifting up from the kitchen. He put on a bathrobe, terry cloth monogrammed with his initials, poured himself a cup, and sat in the breakfast nook with the New York Times spread before him. David and Samuel had already left for school. Esther was on the telephone with her sister, discussing a luncheon at the country club. Sunlight fell through clean windows onto a polished hardwood floor. The swimming pool in the backyard was covered with a green tarp for winter. 2 automobiles gleamed in the driveway. It was, by every measure, a perfectly ordinary Tuesday morning in the life of a man who owned 27 buildings and collected rent from 1,200 families and slept soundly every single night. It was the last ordinary morning of his life. Because at this exact moment, at 7 o'clock on a Tuesday in October, 100 blocks to the north, 7 mechanisms activated simultaneously, like 7 incendiary devices planted beneath the foundation of a house, each one lit by a different hand, each one burning toward the same center. 8 o'clock in the morning. Attorney Randolph Carr walked into the New York City Housing Inspection Office on Church Street, carrying a folder 4 inches thick. 27 complaints, each one a masterpiece of legal precision. Photographs of rat nests, black mold colonies, collapsed ceiling plaster, exposed electrical wiring, broken heating systems, lead paint peeling from walls in ribbons. Medical records, a 2-year-old treated for rat bite infection at Harlem Hospital, 2 children hospitalized for lead poisoning, an elderly man who slipped on a wet floor where pipes had been leaking for 6 months, signed statements from 43 tenants across 9 buildings, and a cover letter addressed not to the clerk who normally handled Harlem complaints, the clerk who forwarded everything to Alderman O'Donoghue's desk, where it vanished, but to Deputy Commissioner Arthur Baker personally. Carr did not leave the folder with the secretary. He waited 45 minutes in a wooden chair in the hallway until Baker's door opened. Baker took the folder, opened it, turned 3 pages. His face changed. The color left it the way water leaves a cracked glass, slowly, and then all at once. "Mr. Carr, why am I seeing this for the first time?" Carr allowed himself a small smile. "Because Alderman O'Donoghue made certain you never would. Until today." Baker closed the folder, picked up his telephone, made 2 calls. By 8:55, 3 inspection teams were dispatched to Harlem. By 9:30, they were inside the first building, cameras clicking, notebooks filling. Alderman O'Donoghue would learn about this in approximately 90 minutes, and when he did, his first instinct would be to call Baker and make it stop. He would discover that Baker was in a meeting. Baker would remain in a meeting for the rest of the day and the rest of the week, 9 o'clock in the morning. Pastor James Delaney stood before 3,000 people in the Abyssinian Baptist Church. An emergency gathering. The pews were full, the balcony was full, people stood along the walls and in the doorways. Delaney's bass voice rolled through the sanctuary like distant thunder, vibrating the stained glass windows in their frames, reaching the people in the last row with the same force as those in the first. Brothers and sisters, there is a Pharaoh among us. His name is Sal Greenbaum, and he believes he can treat the children of God like garbage, pushing old women down staircases, letting rats bite our babies, letting our elders freeze in winter while he sunbathes in Florida. From this day forward, not 1 cent goes into his pocket, not 1 cent, until every building is repaired, until every rat is gone, until every child sleeps safely. This is not a suggestion, brothers and sisters. This is a covenant with the Lord, and the Lord does not negotiate. By noon, every tenant in all 27 buildings knew. The telephone network of the Abyssinian Baptist Church was faster than any newspaper. 1 call to a deacon. The deacon calls 5 families. Each family calls 3 neighbors, and within 3 hours, 1,200 families had received the same message. Do not pay rent. Do not open the door to Greenbaum's collectors. Do not negotiate. Hold the line. 10 o'clock in the morning. Gertrude Wilson submitted her first article to the Amsterdam News. The headline, Rats, Mold, and Millions. How Sal Greenbaum Profits from Harlem's Misery. 8 photographs, the basement rat nests, the mold-covered walls, the lead paint chips on a child's windowsill, the broken heating pipes wrapped in rags, and the kicker, a photograph of Greenbaum's Great Neck home, obtained by a photographer who drove to Long Island at 6 in the morning and shot 3 rolls of film from the public sidewalk, the White House, the pool, the 2 cars, next to photographs of the tenements where children ate paint chips because their mothers could not afford to feed them enough to kill the hunger that made everything look edible. Circulation of the Amsterdam News, 47,000 copies. By evening, every black reader on the eastern seaboard would know the name Sal Greenbaum. 11 o'clock in the morning. Plumber Samuel Porter completed his calls. 17 contractors who worked in Harlem received the same message, delivered in Porter's calm, professional voice, the voice of a man who controlled access to 30 buildings worth of plumbing work. Greenbaum Realty is blacklisted. Anyone who accepts a job from Greenbaum loses every other contract north of 125th Street. This is not a request. 17 out of 17 refused Greenbaum. Unanimous. In a single morning, Sal Greenbaum became the only landlord in Harlem who could not hire a plumber to fix a leaking pipe. Noon. Mouse, Carson called from a phone booth outside the 44th Precinct. Intelligence report, Deputy Commissioner Baker had ordered an emergency inspection of all 27 Greenbaum buildings. 3 teams deployed. 14 violations already documented in the first 2 buildings alone, each violation carrying a fine of up to $500, each one a matter of public record. Alderman O'Donoghue had learned about the inspections and was attempting to reach Baker by phone. Baker's secretary informed him that Mr. Baker was unavailable. O'Donoghue called 3 more times. Baker remained unavailable. The alderman was beginning to sweat. This was the most expensive mistake in the life of every person who had protected Sal Greenbaum. because the protection was never about Greenbaum, it was about convenience. And convenience evaporates the moment it becomes inconvenient. 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Greenbaum's telephone in Great Neck began to ring. The first call, the building manager of 218 on 136th Street. Mr. Greenbaum, the tenants are refusing to pay rent. All of them. The entire building. Second call, the manager of the building on 141st. Same situation here, Mr. Greenbaum, and we have inspectors, 3 men with cameras and notebooks. Third call, fourth, fifth, sixth. By 2 o'clock, Greenbaum had received 11 calls, and every single one painted the same picture. Boycott, inspectors, journalists. Greenbaum grabbed the receiver and dialed Alderman O'Donoghue. O'Donoghue picked up, and his voice sounded like a man who had swallowed a bone. "Sal, what have you done? I have a folder on my desk, thick as a Bible, full of complaints about your buildings. Photographs of rats the size of cats, medical reports of poisoned children. The deputy commissioner called me personally and asked why I had never forwarded any of these complaints to his office. Do you understand what you have done? You have exposed me. I cannot help you. Not now, maybe not ever." Click. Dial tone. The first layer of protection destroyed in 11 hours. 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Greenbaum called his cousin Morris at the district attorney's office. Morris listened, breathing heavily, and then spoke in a whisper that carried the unmistakable vibration of a man protecting his own survival above all else. "Sal, do not call me on this line. Do not call me on any line until this blows over. Call me on this line." The mayor's office has already contacted the Amsterdam News, asking if the photographs are authentic. If my name surfaces next to yours, my career is finished. Do you hear me, Sal? Finished. Handle it yourself. Second layer of protection, destroyed, in 8 hours, 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Greenbaum, hands shaking, dialed his neighbor Captain O'Brien at the 44th Precinct. O'Brien's wife answered. Her husband was on duty and would be late. Greenbaum called the precinct directly. The desk sergeant, "Captain O'Brien is on a call, Mr. Greenbaum." "No, sir, I cannot say when he will return." "No, sir, I cannot take a message." "Good day, sir." The captain who golfed with Greenbaum every other Sunday, whose mortgage had been refinanced at a rate that should have triggered an ethics investigation, could not be reached, would not be reached, because Captain O'Brien had also read the Amsterdam News, and Captain O'Brien had a career to protect. Third layer of protection destroyed in 9 hours, and Bumpy smiled, that same smile, calm and utterly devoid of warmth, that Jessie would see once more, in 5 hours, in the hallway of the apartment on 136th Street, when he would hear 7 words that would make him involuntarily take a step backward. 6:30 in the evening, 11 and a half hours since the launch. All 3 layers of protection, severed. Rent payments, frozen across 27 buildings. Housing inspection, on-site, documenting violations that would generate fines exceeding $50,000. Press, published and circulating. Contractors, blacklisted. And the bank holding Greenbaum's mortgages had received a visit from a concerned depositor, a depositor whose account balance was large enough that the bank could not afford to lose him. The bank manager had scheduled a meeting with Greenbaum for Wednesday morning to review lending terms, which in banking language meant, "We are going to call your loans unless you give us a very good reason not to." Greenbaum sat in his beautiful house in Great Neck. The telephone had stopped ringing. This was worse than when it was ringing. Silence meant that everyone who could help had decided not to. He poured himself a whiskey. His hands trembled so badly that the glass clinked against his teeth. Through the window, the lawn, the covered pool, the 2 cars, everything he had built on the backs of 1,200 families, everything now shaking like a house of cards in a draft. At 7 in the evening, Bumpy received a report from each of his people. He listened in silence, nodded. "Faster than I thought." "He is ready." Jesse Bolden asked. "When?" Bumpy looked at his watch. "Tonight, 2 o'clock. Jesse went pale. Not from fear, from understanding. "Bumpy, are you sure? His house? In Great Neck?" Bumpy did not answer. He reached into his jacket and produced a folded sheet of paper, a list of 9 items, written in neat handwriting, and placed it on the table. "These are the terms. He will sign everyone. Before dawn." Jesse looked at the list, read it, raised his eyes. "Bumpy, he will never agree to this." Bumpy smiled. "He will, Jesse, because when I am finished with him tonight, he will beg to sign." Then Bumpy stood, walked to the hallway of his apartment, and stopped. Jesse followed. Bumpy turned to face him and spoke. 7 words. Jesse heard them. His eyes changed. He lowered his gaze to the floor, took 1 step backward, not from fear, from understanding, from the sudden, absolute clarity of realizing that what Bumpy intended was not revenge. It was something else, something larger. It was not something that those 7 words captured with a precision that made everything, the plan, the map, the 16 people, the 48 hours, make perfect sense. Jesse looked up. "I will get the cars." Wednesday, the 18th of October, 1:57 in the morning. Great Neck, Long Island. A quiet street, maple trees, trimmed hedges, white fences, dark windows of sleeping houses. The kind of street where nothing ever happened after 10 o'clock at night, where the loudest sound was a dog barking 2 blocks away, and even that was considered a disturbance. 1:57 in the morning. 3 black automobiles glided down the dark street of Great Neck. And at this moment, at this exact moment, Bumpy Johnson sat in the back seat of the lead Cadillac, and on his face was absolute calm. The calm of a man who knew what was about to happen, who had known since the moment in the hallway of his apartment 2 hours ago when he spoke 7 words to Jesse Bolden, and Jesse stepped back. 7 words that you will learn in just a few minutes because we have almost arrived. But first, the white door with the brass knocker. First, 3 knocks. 3 black cars, 2 Cadillacs, and a Lincoln killed their headlights 2 blocks from the Greenbaum residence and rolled to it in darkness, engines off for the last 50 meters, coasting on momentum. 8 men stepped out in silence. 4 remained with the vehicles. 4 walked toward the house. At the front, Bumpy Johnson, in a black overcoat, black fedora, black gloves. He did not hurry. His footsteps on the flagstone path to the porch were the only sound within a 1-block radius. 2 o'clock exactly. Bumpy climbed the porch steps, stopped before a white door with a brass knocker shaped like a lion's head. He did not use the knocker. He knocked with his knuckles 3 times, slowly, deliberately. 3 strikes that Sal Greenbaum would hear in his nightmares until the end of his days. Silence. Then, shuffling behind the door. The click of a light switch, hallway light spilling through the frosted glass panes on either side of the door. Greenbaum's voice, hoarse from sleep. "Who is there? It is 2 in the morning." Bumpy said nothing. Greenbaum pressed his eye to the peephole, saw a black overcoat, a black hat. Could not make out the face. The porch light was off. His fingers trembled on the lock. He knew, after the day he had just lived through, he knew this was connected, that this was part of what had descended on him, but he did not know who stood behind his door. "I will call the police." The voice from outside, calm, quiet, almost polite. "Mr. Greenbaum, the police will not come. You have already discovered that, I believe. Open the door. We need to discuss your future, and the future of your boys, David and Samuel, the names of his children." Greenbaum heard the names of his children spoken aloud, at night, through a locked door, and the world ceased to exist. Everything he knew about safety, about protection, about the inviolability of his home in a quiet, white suburb, all of it vanished in a single heartbeat. Someone stood on his porch at 2 a.m. and knew his sons' names. Greenbaum opened the door. His hands shook so violently that he could barely work the deadbolt. He saw Bumpy Johnson and did not recognize him. He had never seen him in person. He did not know who this was. He saw a tall black man in an expensive coat, with 3 men standing behind him, and beyond those men, the darkness of an October night. "Who are you? What do you want? I have children upstairs. Please do not—" Bumpy stepped into the foyer, not pushed his way in, stepped in, the way a man enters his own home. He removed his hat, hung it carefully on the coat hook by the door, turned to Greenbaum, and spoke. "Mr. Greenbaum, my name is Ellsworth Johnson." "But perhaps it will be clearer if I say this. My mother lives on the 3rd floor of Building 319 on West 139th Street. The woman you pushed down the stairs on Saturday, do you remember?" Greenbaum turned white. In his eyes, the mathematics of terror. Ellsworth Johnson, Bumpy Johnson, mother on 139th, the old woman he had pushed. This was her son. This was Bumpy Johnson. His knees buckled, literally buckled, as if someone had removed the bones from his legs. He grabbed the wall to keep from falling. "Mr. Johnson, I did not know she was your— Listen, we can—" Bumpy raised one hand, palm forward, the gesture that stops words. "Mr. Greenbaum, I did not come to hear apologies. I came to offer you a deal, the only deal you have left. But before I explain it, I want you to understand something." Bumpy paused, looked at the staircase leading to the 2nd floor. Up there, the children's bedrooms. "Your boys are sleeping right now. David is in the room on the left, Samuel in the room on the right. David sleeps on his left side, always the left. He has a habit of hugging his pillow. Samuel has a baseball glove on his nightstand and a glass of water that he never finishes." Greenbaum made a sound, not a scream, not a sob, something between the two, the sound a human being makes when they understand that their home is not a fortress, that someone knows their children's habits better than a stranger should, that walls and doors and locks and fences mean nothing. And then Greenbaum dropped to his knees, onto the tile floor of the foyer of his beautiful house in a quiet white suburb. A 47-year-old man who owned 27 buildings, who had pushed a 72-year-old woman down a flight of stairs 3 days ago, who had felt untouchable his entire adult life, on his knees before a black man he had not even considered human 72 hours earlier. And he screamed, "Consider human. Take me. Do whatever you want to me. But do not touch my children. Please, do not touch David and Sam. They are innocent. Take me, not my kids." The scream was loud enough that the men by the cars heard it through closed windows. Desperate enough that even Bumpy's 3 men, standing behind him, men who had seen and heard many terrible things, involuntarily looked away. Black and white checkered tile. Greenbaum's knees on a white square. The reflection of the hallway lamp on his bald head, beaded with sweat. The smell of lavender. Esther Greenbaum kept lavender sachets in the foyer closet, mixing with the acrid smell of fear sweat. Upstairs, Behind a closed door, an 11-year-old boy woke to the sound of his father screaming and lay in the darkness, clutching a baseball glove to his chest. Bumpy stood over Greenbaum and said nothing. He let him scream. 30 seconds, 40, a full minute. Let him expel the terror. And when the screaming dissolved into sobbing, when Greenbaum bent forward until his forehead touched the tile and his hands covered his head, Bumpy reached into the inner pocket of his overcoat and placed a folded sheet of paper on the floor in front of him. "Mr. Greenbaum, I do not harm children. I have never harmed children, and I never will. That is a rule I will not break for anyone or for any reason. Your boys are safe. They have always been safe. But I wanted you to feel what a mother feels when she is thrown down a flight of stairs. The fear for those you love. The fear that someone stronger can do anything they want to the people you care about, and you can do nothing. Now you know what that feels like. Now you understand." Bumpy pointed at the sheet of paper on the tile. "There are 9 items on this list. Read them. Sign them. Begin executing them at dawn. This is not a request, Mr. Greenbaum. This is the only scenario in which you keep your buildings, your house, and your life as you know it." Greenbaum sat on the floor. He did not have the strength to stand. Bumpy leaned against the wall, arms crossed, patient, like a surgeon waiting for anesthesia to take effect. The sheet of paper lay on the black and white tile between them. Greenbaum picked it up with shaking hands. Read each item, a blow. Item 1, immediate reduction of rent in all 27 buildings to market rate, a 40% decrease from current levels. Greenbaum groaned. 40% was more than $100,000 per year. Item 2, complete capital renovation of all 27 buildings, plumbing, electrical, heating, pest control, replacement of all lead paint, to be completed by the 1st of March, 1950, at Greenbaum's expense. Item 3, hiring of black building managers for every property at fair wages, replacing the white managers who lived outside Harlem and appeared only to collect money. Item 4, establishment of a medical assistance fund for tenants who had suffered health consequences from living conditions. Initial contribution, $20,000. Item 5, a personal apology to Margaret Johnson, in person, in her apartment, on his knees, in front of witnesses, the same way he knelt here. Greenbaum looked up. "On my knees. You want me to?" Bumpy nodded. "Once." Item 6, monthly financial reporting to a tenant committee. Complete transparency of income and expenditures for every building. Item 7, no evictions without approval from the tenant committee and Attorney Carr. Item 8, termination of all corrupt relationships, cessation of payments to Alderman O'Donoghue and any other attempts to influence housing inspections. Item 9, the last, and the one that made Greenbaum close his eyes. If any of the preceding 8 items were violated, all information regarding Greenbaum's financial operations, including the tax evasion that Bumpy had learned about through his contact at the bank, would be forwarded to the Internal Revenue Service. Tax fraud was a federal crime. That meant prison. That meant losing not 27 buildings, but everything. Greenbaum read the last item and dropped the paper. This is impossible. You will bankrupt me. I cannot." Bumpy leaned down, slowly, until his face was 12 inches from Greenbaum's face. His voice dropped to a whisper that somehow sounded louder than any shout. "Mr. Greenbaum, my mother has lived in your building for 31 years. 31 years she paid your rent without a single missed month. And you pushed her down the stairs for 1 week of delay. 1 week, after 31 years. So you will not bargain. You will not argue. You will take the pen. You will sign. and you will begin at dawn. Because the alternative, Mr. Greenbaum, is not me. The alternative is the newspapers, the inspectors, the bank, and the Internal Revenue Service, all at once. And then you will lose not 40% of the rent. You will lose everything, the house, the cars, the school for your boys, everything. Bumpy straightened, reached into his pocket, produced a fountain pen and placed it on the floor beside the paper. Decide, Mr. Greenbaum, but decide now. I do not like to wait. Silence. 20 seconds. Greenbaum looked at the pen, at the paper, at the staircase leading to his sleeping children, at the man standing above him, and he took the pen. The signature of Sal Greenbaum on the tile floor of his own foyer at 2:41 in the morning, crooked, trembling, barely legible. The most expensive signature he had ever placed on any document, and the most important signature Harlem had ever received. Jesse Bolden stood by the door and watched Greenbaum sign with a shaking hand, and he remembered the hallway of the apartment on 136th Street 2 hours earlier, and 7 words, and for the first time truly understood what Bumpy had meant. Every word, literally, every single one. Bumpy watched Greenbaum sign, and his face expressed nothing. No joy, no satisfaction, no triumph. Only the calm of a man who had known this moment would arrive from the very second he saw milk and blood mixing on the stairs. Bumpy took the signed sheet, folded it carefully, placed it in his overcoat pocket, took his hat from the hook, put it on, turned toward the door, and on the threshold, without turning back, spoke one final time. "Mr. Greenbaum, you gave my mother 7 days. I managed in 3. Remember that difference. And one more thing. In 1 week you will come to my mother, 3rd floor, the same staircase, and you will apologize, on your knees, in front of witnesses. If your knees hurt from the tile right now, imagine how my mother's shoulder felt when she tumbled down your steps." The door closed. 3 automobiles disappeared into the great neck darkness as silently as they had appeared. Greenbaum remained sitting on the floor of his foyer. He did not move for 40 minutes. Esther found him at 3:20, barefoot on cold tile, his eyes fixed on the coat hook where Bumpy's hat had hung moments before. She shook his shoulder, asked what happened, but Greenbaum only repeated one phrase, over and over like a record stuck in its groove. "I did not know whose son that was. I did not know." Wednesday, the 25th of October, 1949. 11 o'clock in the morning exactly. 11 days since Margaret Johnson fell down those stairs. The same building, 319 on West 139th Street. The same staircase, 319, the same steps, except now the milk and blood had been scrubbed away long ago, and the burned-out light bulb on the 2nd floor had been replaced with a new one. Bright. Greenbaum had started executing the conditions immediately. Repair crews appeared in the buildings on Thursday, the day after the night visit, but one item remained unfulfilled. Number 5, the public apology, on his knees, with witnesses. A black Buick stopped in front of the building. Sal Greenbaum stepped out and froze for a moment when he saw what awaited him. On the sidewalk, on the stoop, on the steps of the entrance, in the windows of the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th floors, people. 30, 40, 50, more. Tenants from this building and from neighboring Greenbaum buildings who had come to watch. The word had spread through the neighborhood instantly. Greenbaum is coming to apologize to Bumpy's mother, on his knees. Gertrude Wilson stood by the railing with her notebook. Pastor Delaney on the stoop, arms folded across his chest like a judge. Attorney Carr by the entrance door with a copy of the signed agreement in his briefcase. Gilbert the barber in the crowd, smiling for the first time in years. Bumpy was nowhere to be seen. Not in the crowd, Not on the staircase, not in the building. He had not come. And this was the most powerful detail of the entire event. Bumpy did not come because he did not need to be present. The mechanism was running. The machine was working. Greenbaum would fulfill the terms not because Bumpy stood beside him watching, but because Bumpy could be anywhere. And that was more terrifying than any physical presence. Greenbaum climbed the stairs. Those stairs, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, he counted every step, because every step now carried meaning. Every step reminded him of how a 72-year-old woman had tumbled down them 11 days ago. 3rd floor, Margaret's door, open. Margaret sat in a chair by the window, her arm in a sling. The shoulder still ached. On the table, fresh bread. The same bread she had been baking that Saturday, 11 days before, when Greenbaum came for the rent and left her crumpled on the landing floor. Greenbaum entered the apartment. The door remained open, as stipulated. In the hallway outside, 8 witnesses, neighbors who had heard the scream 11 days ago and had been powerless to do anything. Now they watched. Greenbaum stood before Margaret. His lips moved, but no sound came out. He could not force himself to begin. 3 seconds. 5. 7. A voice from the hallway, quiet, female, belonging to Margaret's neighbor Dorothy Henderson, whose grandson had been hospitalized from a rat bite in the basement of this very building. "On your knees, Mr. Greenbaum. You promised. On your knees." And Greenbaum lowered himself, slowly, like a man stepping into freezing water. His knees touched the wooden floor of the apartment he had not repaired in 31 years, the floor that creaked and sagged beneath him, the floor for which he had collected money every single month for 3 decades. "Mrs. Johnson, I ask your forgiveness for the stairs, for what I did. It was unforgivable. I ask your forgiveness." Margaret looked at him for a long time, a very long time, a woman who had raised 8 children, survived the Great Depression, buried a husband, and never once, not a single time, missed a rent payment in 31 years, except for 1 week when she fell ill. She looked at the man who had pushed her down the stairs for that 1 week, and she said, "Mr. Greenbaum, I accept your apology. Stand up. The floor is dirty." Margaret said 4 words that Harlem would repeat for decades, but Margaret did not know one thing. 7 words that her son had spoken to Jesse Bolden in the hallway of the apartment on 136th Street, 2 hours before the drive to Great Neck. Bumpy would never tell her. He spoke those 7 words only once, to one person. And right now, I am going to tell you, because you have walked the entire path, because you have seen the milk and blood on the stairs and heard Greenbaum screaming, "Take me, not my kids," and felt the scratch of a fountain pen on paper on a tile floor, because you have earned the right to know the truth. But first, Greenbaum had to walk out of the building on 139th Street, through the silent crowd, to his Buick, and that silence was louder than any scream because it contained something Harlem had not felt in a very long time: dignity. 4 words. "Stand up. The floor is dirty." Not Bumpy's words, not Greenbaum's scream. Margaret's words. 4 words that contained more dignity, more power, and more contempt than all of Bumpy's threats combined. Because Margaret did not forgive, she released. And the difference between those 2 things is the difference between weakness and authority. Greenbaum walked out of the building at 11:34 in the morning, passed through the silent crowd, which parted before him like water before a stone, got into the Buick, drove away. Not a single person in the crowd spoke a word, no insults, no mockery, no applause, just silence. But Gertrude Wilson was not silent. She was writing, every word, every detail. Friday, the 27th of October, 1949. The Amsterdam News, the largest black newspaper in New York, hit the streets with a front-page headline that Gertrude Wilson had typed until 3 in the morning. Landlord on his knees. How Harlem made Greenbaum apologize. Circulation, 47,000 copies. By Friday evening, the newsroom had run out. People passed the paper from hand to hand, read it aloud in barber shops, kitchens, churches, and it was not Bumpy's words they quoted most often. It was Margaret's. Stand up. The floor is dirty. The wave that followed moved faster than anyone anticipated. What happened in the next 3 weeks would reshape the landscape of housing in Harlem in ways that no politician, no law, and no preacher had managed in 3 decades. Within 3 weeks, from late October through mid-November, tenants in 11 additional buildings owned by other white landlords in Harlem organized rent strikes using the exact model Bumpy had created. One after another, the formula was identical: simultaneous complaints to the inspection office, payment boycott, press coverage, contractor blockade. Attorney Carr, who had represented Greenbaum's tenants, received 23 new clients in a single month. Pastor Delaney established the Harlem Fair Housing Committee, an organization that would coordinate tenant advocacy against negligent landlords for the next decade. 3 landlords reduced rents voluntarily, without waiting for a strike. They had read the newspaper, they had heard the story, they knew the name behind it, and they understood. If Bumpy Johnson could bring Sal Greenbaum to his knees in 3 days, a man with 3 layers of protection, a prosecutor, a police captain, and a politician in his pocket, then they had no chance whatsoever. By December of '49, rents had decreased across 39 buildings in Harlem. More than 2,000 families paid less. Repair crews worked in 20 buildings simultaneously. 4 black building managers were hired for the first time in the neighborhood's history. The Housing Inspection Office, for the first time in a decade, conducted comprehensive inspections of every building between 125th and 155th Streets. In November of 1949, a reporter from the Pittsburgh Courier secured the only interview Bumpy ever gave on the subject. The reporter asked, "Mr. Johnson, did you avenge your mother, or did you fight for the rights of Harlem tenants?" Bumpy was silent for 15 seconds. The reporter later wrote that those 15 seconds were the longest of his career. "Young man, my mother baked bread. She baked it every Saturday for 31 years straight in an apartment she paid for every month. And the man who took her money for 31 years pushed her down the stairs for 1 week of delay. 1 week. You ask what I fought for. I fought so that a woman who bakes bread on Saturdays can walk up the stairs of her own building without being thrown down them. If that is revenge, then revenge. If that is rights, then rights. I do not care what you call it. The staircase is fixed. The bread is baking. My mother is alive. That is enough." The reporter would later say it was the finest quote he recorded in 20 years of journalism. 1967. Gilbert Allen's barbershop on the ground floor of the building on 139th Street. 18 years after that Saturday. Gilbert, gray-haired now, arthritic fingers barely able to grip the scissors, sat in his own chair after closing. Across from him, a young man, 22 years old, freshly arrived in Harlem from Alabama, dreaming of making moves and asking about Bumpy Johnson. The young man asked point blank, "Mr. Allen, is it true Bumpy made a white landlord crawl on his knees? How did he do it?" Gilbert was quiet, set his coffee cup on the armrest, looked through the window at the staircase across the street, that same staircase. "I will tell you one thing, one time, and you will never repeat it in front of Bumpy." The young man nodded. When Bumpy saw his mother on the floor of that landing, blood on her face and milk on her dress, he did not scream. He did not pull his gun. He picked her up, carried her inside, cleaned the wound, and sat in silence for 20 minutes. Then he walked out to the hallway, called me, called Jesse, called the lawyer, explained everything, every detail. We listened. When he finished, Jesse asked, "Bumpy, what if Greenbaum does not break? What if his friends in City Hall move faster than we can hit?" Gilbert fell silent. The young man waited. Bumpy looked at Jesse, calm, the way you look at a child who has asked why the sky is blue, and he said 7 words. Pause. Gilbert finished his coffee. 7 words I remember every single day 18 years later. 7 words that explain everything, not just the Greenbaum story, but everything Bumpy Johnson ever did. Pause. He said, "The staircase remembers who walks up it." Silence in the barber shop. "You understand, young man? Not who falls down it, who walks up it." Bumpy was not destroying Greenbaum. He was climbing, every step, a climb. Complaints to the inspection office, a step. Tenant boycott, a step. Newspaper articles, a step. The visit to Great Neck, a step. The apology on his knees, a step. He was not bringing Greenbaum down. He was lifting Harlem up, and the staircase remembered. People remembered. That is why we are sitting here 18 years later, and you are asking me about him, because the staircase remembers. Gilbert set the empty cup down, stood, walked to the window. Bumpy did not build an empire. He built a staircase, and everyone who climbed it, every family that started paying fair rent, every child that stopped eating lead paint off the walls, every mother who walked through her building without being shoved down the steps, every one of them stands on stairs that Bumpy fixed, not with fists, not with bullets, with a plan. December 1949, Saturday, Building 319 on West 139th Street. The staircase had been repaired. New banisters, new steps, fresh paint, light bulbs on every landing, bright, burning. Margaret Johnson climbed to the 3rd floor, holding the new railing. In her hands, a brown paper bag from the grocery on Lenox Avenue. Milk, bread, butter. She climbed slowly. The shoulder still ached sometimes in cold weather, but she climbed on her own. On the 2nd floor landing, she stopped and looked down. 7 steps. The steps she had fallen down 11 weeks earlier. They were new now, light-colored wood, clean, solid beneath her feet. Margaret nodded to herself, a small nod, the kind only she would notice, and entered her apartment. Within a minute, the smell of fresh bread drifted through the closed door into the hallway. The same bread she had been baking on the Saturday when everything started. The same bread she would bake every Saturday for the next 11 years until 1960 in an apartment with working heat, solid walls, bright light bulbs on every landing, and a staircase that held firm beneath her feet. The methods Bumpy Johnson deployed in October of '49, simultaneous economic pressure on finances, reputation, regulators, and supply chains, would be studied and replicated by civil rights organizers for the next 2 decades. The Montgomery bus boycott of '55, the Greensboro sit-ins of '60, the Birmingham marches of '63. Every one of them employed the same principle that Bumpy had understood in the darkness of a basement surrounded by rats. Economic pressure is more devastating than violence. Cut the cash flow and watch the tree wither. But perhaps the most extraordinary thing about this story is not the tactics, not the capitulation of Greenbaum, not even the wave of change that rolled through Harlem afterward. The most extraordinary thing is that Bumpy Johnson, a man who could have ended Greenbaum's life on that staircase and never been caught, chose a different path. Not because he was kind, not because he was weak, but because 24 years earlier in Charleston, South Carolina, he had answered an insult to his mother with his fists and lost everything: his home, his family, his homeland. 24 years later, someone touched his mother again, and Bumpy answered differently. He answered in a way that turned the enemy into an instrument of change. Greenbaum, against his own will, became the first white landlord in Harlem to repair his buildings, reduce his rents, and hire black managers, the first of many. And at the center of it all, a staircase. 7 steps on West 139th Street. Steps that a mother fell down. Steps that a son climbed back up. Steps where a landlord knelt. Steps that were repaired. And the smell of fresh bread behind a closed door on the 3rd floor. Bread that Margaret Johnson baked every Saturday, the way she always had, the way she always would, in an apartment where the heat worked, and the walls were solid, and the lights were bright on every landing of the staircase she had once tumbled down. 7 steps, milk and blood, and 7 words that explained everything. The staircase remembers who walks up it, and the staircase remembered